Back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. We can take your phone calls, 737-7587. Your thoughts on, the child marriage bill limiting how old you can be in Tennessee to get married, or if a child should be allowed to go ahead and just get married regardless. And that's kind of the way it is in the state right now, which I think surprised Representative Jernigan and Senator Yarbro, which is one reason they sponsored all of this. We've got some people that waited through the break, and we've got lines open if you have thoughts. Let's go next to Sherry. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, how are you?
Good. What's your thought?
Okay, I know that y'all keep saying back in the days, my grandmother married my grandfather. She was 14, he was 31. And when I was brought along, because my grandparents raised me, I saw a woman who had been beat down by her circumstances, had child after child for 11 years, and she never got anywhere in life because she was held back in a marriage that she was completely unhappy in. And why? Because she had no other choice or no other option but to marry this gentleman because her parents said so. And I have teenagers now, and I would fight tooth and nail right along beside you gentlemen to keep a 47-year-old from marrying my daughter. So I am 100% in support of your bill, because if you really look at the older marriages, a lot of them were pushed into those marriages. They weren't a happy sweetheart kind of deal.
Thank you for your call, and I think you're probably right on the money in a lot. I'm sure there's some out there that are going to say that their grandparents got married and they were happy as far as they could perceive, and who knows how much was really shared with them and how much you knew as a grandchild. But that call, it's I mean, I can just imagine that. I mean, think about it. Again, I don't know. Do you have children?
I do.
Okay, how old are they?
I have a 9-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl.
Okay. Well, under the state law, your 2-year-old can get married. That's
under
great.
the law right
if
now.
the judge approves it. That's awesome. And as for you, you've got a 16-year-old.
I've got 3 girls.
Son
I've got
right now,
15, 16, 19 girls, and then the oldest is a boy.
Well, I just can't even, they don't even know.
No.
I mean, how could a 14-year-old, 15-year-old really know everything that goes into being into a marriage and a home? I mean, what you have is an older spouse who's going to control everything.
Well, and I think Sherry's call, I think is the other side of, we've heard from colleagues who share really positive stories of grandparents and parents who got married at a young age. But the reality is that those oftentimes weren't marriages they chose, and it's people should be able to make a lifetime decision that's going to further their ambitions, their hopes, their dreams for the life they want to live, and not have that decision made by their parents.
Yeah. All right, let's go to Lucy. Hi, Lucy.
Hey, y'all. I just want to touch on what Mr. Jernigan said about, going down to the church and making a commitment before your God, but then getting married at an older age. My great-grandmother was born in the 1860s. When she got married, she was 21 years of age, and so was her husband, because that was basically the law.
That was the law
here in the state of Tennessee that they really pushed, and there was a reason for it. When they speak of the bonds of matrimony, everybody thinks that's a bond between you and your God. That's a bond saying that somebody put up a bond that said that if you could not take care of the offspring of this marriage, you would be financially responsible. That's whoever signed the marriage bond, okay?
It's a blood
so
test,
they were 21, and they had somebody that would agree to sign that bond of matrimony. Now it's kind of come down to something else, that this is all religious marriage. No, I am a taxpayer. The state of Tennessee, the state will step in and take your children into the poorhouse and whatever to take care of them, and it was considered to be putting a burden on the public. If you became a widow, even in the 1930s, you were only allowed to go to the poorhouse for a year. Then after that, you better find your husband, because you were putting a burden on the county. So on that, I'll hang up and take whatever you have to say to that off the air.
Thank you. So is that actually right? The laws were tougher back when her when did all of it change?
In fact, my grandparents eloped to Ringgold, Georgia. That was we had chapels were everywhere in Georgia. and they would go down, and that's where they went to.
So when did
elope.
this change then? So it was different
Yeah,
at
when
some
did they
point
change?
along. Okay,
That
somewhere
part I'm
in
not
the,
sure about.
But in the early 1900s, I guess, or something along those lines,
Yeah.
there was a
I think
transition
post-Civil
made.
War, there was a change, and then the current set of laws were enacting 16 at a minimum, sort of during the Great Depression. And there was a really famous story in 1937 where they went to a county in East Tennessee and found a 9-year-old who had been married to a 22-year-old. And it was in Time Life magazine. They made a movie about it, and the legislature was embarrassed enough to then start a different set of laws, which is what we're under right. Basically, we haven't changed the current laws since 1937.
Since 1937. All right, the phone number's up there, 737-7587. If you have any thoughts or questions, we're also streaming live right now on Facebook. A moment ago, you talked about how in Kentucky they did pass a similar type law there, and you said it had the support of the family organization there, but the same organization type along those lines here is not in support of it. What's the difference there?
You know, that is to us one of the biggest mysteries here, because the bill that we have as amended largely mirrors the reforms that were just passed overwhelmingly by the Senate and House in Kentucky, and had the full endorsement of the Kentucky Family Foundation, which is affiliated with Focus on the Family. Our Focus on the Family affiliate, the Family Action Council, has been opposed to this on the grounds of parental rights, as we've discussed. And I think that they've also been raising the argument that this has something to do with litigation about same-sex marriage. That is, we have trouble figuring out where that's coming from, because this doesn't affect, there's nothing in this law that affects the sex requirements of marriage, doesn't change that language at all.
Yeah, I've read the argument, and I do not understand it.
I don't either.
I don't understand that one. So, I mean, of course, you can throw that out there if you're against it. No, the different issue on same-sex marriage in the state, I think, I would like to think, you know, most people are going to be opposed to children getting married. I know in Tennessee, same-sex marriage is still a very controversial issue for a lot of folks, but kind of lumping them all together here, huh? Yeah.
Right,
So,
and I think it's just playing with, it's putting one controversy into another, but
seems separate issues.
But you know, under the current law, what the law is enforced today, if there was parental consent to marry a 16-year-old boy to a 35-year-old man, the county clerk would have to issue that certificate. And so even by the logic of the organization, I have trouble finding
that's a good point.
why this would make sense.
As I said, people can message us too on Facebook at newschannel5.com. Alan mentions this. Here's his point of view. He says the state has no business in the marriage business. They're already making millions off the excessive license fees that have done little other than cause couples simply to live together instead of getting married. And he says he was 19 and my wife 16 when we got married. He says, under this law, we would have been prohibited from getting married, and our 54-year marriage would not have existed. So I can hear where he's coming from.
I guess my question would have been, because it sounds like that's a long time and married and love and bride. What would have been the harm of him waiting 1 year or 2 years so she was 18? If you've been in love and you're that committed for that long,
they would have a 52-year marriage, and I think it probably would be equally successful.
Yeah, I mean, he was basically saying for him, and he probably objects to that thought, because the next sentence was, you know, it's disgusting that people are encouraged to live together, then get a marriage license when they turn 18. But neither of you said that they should live together. You just said they could declare their love and their plans. Now, they might end up living together. You never know.
And
again, he was 19 and 16, which again, under the law, that really, even for me looking on the outside, is not the thing that really worries me most about the law in the state of Tennessee. 19 and 16-year-old, and he's very successful marriage, good for him. My big problem is the underage girls and the ones that aren't 19 like him. Good for him. He wasn't too old much. The 30 and 40-year-olds, they're slime bags. I'm sorry. A slime bag. If you're a 40-year-old trying to marry a 14-year-old, you're a slime bag. Okay?
I don't think there's any question about that. And also, I think the notion that the state should get out of the marriage business altogether just isn't realistic. We have to have laws to figure out who gets property when people die, who's going to have rights and responsibilities over the raising of children. Taxes. I mean, it affects health care benefits. So much of our society is built on marriage, and if we literally got the state to where it had no positional marriage, you would have to change a significant portion of the laws in Tennessee.
Let's go to Ernest. Hi, Ernest.
Yes, sir.
Hey, what's on your mind, Ernie?
Hey, I've been sitting here listening to this about this marriage bill.
Yeah.
And it's all been talking about young women. I mean, talking about young girls marrying older men. What about these young boys marrying older women, and we just look at that as sowing wild oats?
Hey, listen, you know, you're not wrong about the unfortunate perception. Your law would affect either gender, but you know, it's true. Yeah, and unfortunately, in the news business, you guys have seen this. I've done plenty of stories on male adult teachers getting arrested for having sexual relationships with their students, okay? And that's universally condemned. But on the other hand, I've done my share of stories where an attractive young teacher has a sexual relationship with a young boy, and that's just as wrong. And yet, the public perception is just as he says at times.
Well, I think you're right. It's just as wrong, and it would be just as illegal under our proposal.
Okay.
We've been speaking more in terms of women because 90% of these marriages are for women. There are 10% of these marriages where minor men or minor boys are being married, and we think that's wrong too.
Yeah. Okay.
And equally, they've lost their childhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's gone. You can call it wild oats, but they've lost their childhood.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned it, Ernest, because under their law, it would be the same. Now, whether society perceives it the same, I think you're right. There is a difference, unfortunately, there in the minds of some out there, but it's wrong either way. We'll take a break on that note. When we come back, final segment with our guest, 737-7587, or if you'd like to message us like Alan did with a good comment from Facebook, go ahead and we'll try to include that as well. We're streaming live at newschannel5.com. We'll be back with more right after this.